disastrous press conference just unfolded in the White House. Donald Trump's chief propagandist, Caroline Leavitt, seemed out of breath. She seemed fatigued, and she was really struggling to answer these questions. Here, she laughs at the concept. Watch this.
So the courts are basically telling you guys they think that the White House's policies, the president's policies, are in some way against the law.
Well, these laws have already been granted to the president by the Constitution and by laws that have been previously passed. I'll give you another example. For instance, we've been blocked in court for the revocation of visas.
Caroline Leavitt's performance went from bad to worse when reporters kept grilling her about Trump's policies and a completely fake government report. But it wasn't just her stammering that's gone viral. It's her dismissive laughter when cornered. What went so wrong? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great! Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. It all started with the type of panic that only a courtroom smackdown can trigger. The Trump administration was reeling after two significant defeats in federal court. Defeats they honestly didn't see coming. First, there was the blow to their aggressive tariffs policy, something Trump had championed as his way of sticking it to international trade partners. The courts ruled that these tariffs weren't just a bad idea, they were flat out unlawful. Then came another bombshell. The court's decision, overturning Trump's visa limitations. This was a policy that had formed a cornerstone of his hardline immigration stance. Losing both in such a short span, not exactly a great day to be working in the West Wing. The legal losses were bad enough, but what really poured gas on the dumpster fire was the wave of backlash that followed. Business leaders, immigration advocates, heck, even some congressional Republicans were quick to pounce. Think about it. These weren't just policy issues. These were the Trumpisms his team had used to define their brand, their tough guy persona. The administration had spent years telling the public these moves were not only necessary but genius, only to have a judge say, actually no, not even close.
Caroline Leavitt is asked by a reporter about some of the breaking news, first reported by a news organization called Notice, that the Trump regime's MAHA report, Make America Healthy Again report.
A Notice investigation found that the Hallmark MAHA Commission report that was released last week cites studies that appear to not exist. We know that because in part we reached out to some of the listed authors who said that they didn't write the studies.
We have complete confidence in Secretary Kennedy and his team at HHS. I understand there were some formatting issues with the MAHA report that are being addressed, and the report will be updated, but it does not negate the substance of the report.
Boy, did they scramble. Facing mounting pressure, they decided to throw together a press conference to calm the storm. Well, more like to look like they were calming the storm. The plan was simple. Double down, spin these losses into victories, or at least slap enough confusing words together to take the heat off. The creativity, minimal. The strategy, dubious. And the execution, well, that brings us to Caroline Leavitt. Now, who's Caroline Leavitt, you're wondering? She's a relatively low-level press secretary who somehow found herself agreeing, or being voluntold, to take on the meteoric mess this press conference was destined to be. You can almost imagine the conversation leading up to it. Caroline, it's your time to shine. Shine, they said as they shoved her toward the podium. She was never meant to handle an emergency of this scale, especially not one where the stakes were this high. But here she was, tasked with standing in front of a room full of journalists who can smell fear faster than a shark. The air in the press briefing room was heavy, not just with tension, but with the distinct aroma of disaster waiting to happen. Cameras clicked furiously, microphones buzzed with reporters trying to make sure they could capture every single second. Meanwhile, Caroline stepped up to the podium like someone walking through a minefield, trying not to set off one embarrassing explosion after another. Adding to the panic was a little gem called the MAHA report. This was supposed to be the administration's answer to criticisms of the tariffs. It was a report allegedly packed with ironclad evidence that made Trump's trade policies look like a stroke of economic genius. The problem? It was fake. Not fake as in exaggerated. Fake as in the numbers were doctored. The citations didn't exist. And wait for it, AI was reportedly used to make up whole sections. So yeah, this concocted piece of brilliance wasn't fooling anyone. Yet Yet here it was, sitting there like a bad punchline at a joke nobody wanted to hear. And guess who got to explain it, Caroline? Now imagine being in her shoes, or rather her sensible work-appropriate heels, as she faced a room full of reporters already fired up over the legal defeats. You could almost see her scanning the crowd, each press member armed with a question more loaded than the last. This was no ordinary Q&A session. It was a buzzsaw, and Caroline was the unfortunate piece of plywood. The stage was set for chaos, and to her credit, Caroline looked like she knew she was in trouble. She adjusted the microphone, glanced at her notes a little too long, and took a deep breath before diving in. But no amount of deep breathing could have prepared her for what was coming. Defending the Trump administration's loss on tariffs? Impossible. Brushing off the implications of the visa ruling? Good luck. Trying to pass off the Maha report as legitimate when even a high schooler could spot the errors. It was like trying to convince someone a square is actually a circle. It just wasn't going to work. It's almost as if the administration had thrown Caroline in, knowing full well that the whole press conference was a losing game. The plan wasn't to win. It was to put someone out there to absorb the punches while they regrouped behind closed doors. Maybe they thought sending someone with less seniority would shield them from harsher criticism.
This is the most incompetent and corrupt regime imaginable. I guess fortunately their incompetence exceeds the corruption, but they're basically both very, very bad.
The president says he's not happy with all aspects of it. What changes would he like to see be made? And can this bill be both big and beautiful?
It is a one big, beautiful bill, as the name rings true. The president's ultimate priority is to get this bill back to his desk for signature. And the president's priorities in this bill are non-negotiable in terms of the tax priorities he wants to see and the large tax cuts in the border investments that are currently in this bill.
Maybe they hoped the conversation wouldn't spiral out of control. Either way, poor Caroline was the sacrificial lamb standing under the spotlight while the wolves licked their chops. As uneasy as she was, there was no turning back. She had to defend the indefensible, bluff her way through policy questions, and somehow keep her composure when the press, or let's be honest, the whole country, was watching her every move. And with all the weight of Trump's policies, legal backlash, and that cartoonishly fake report hanging over her, Caroline was already losing control before she even started speaking. So what happened next? What turned this already disastrous setup into the train wreck we all saw on social media? Let's just say her first move at the podium didn't exactly scream confidence, and the internet hasn't stopped laughing since. Caroline Leavitt's nervous laugh was awkward enough, but when reporters started circling like hawks, that little laugh turned into the moment that defined the press conference, and not in a good way. It was her unintentional giveaway, like the tell of a bad poker player with a losing hand. Right after being asked about the court rulings, those massive defeats against Trump's tariffs and visa restrictions, Leavitt tried brushing them off with a chuckle. "I don't think anyone's losing sleep over this," she said, with the kind of forced smile that was practically begging the room to back off. Spoiler, they didn't. Now, it's fair to say the court rulings weren't tiny matters. The visa case was a direct hit to one of Trump's key immigration policies, the kind of thing his base usually rallies around with endless chants and hashtags. And the tariff ruling, that was more than just a hiccup in trade negotiations. It was a blow to Trump's whole self-proclaimed genius businessman image. So when Leavitt laughed, dismissed reporters' concerns, and called the whole thing overblown, it was like tossing a match into a pile of dry leaves. The press turned up the heat instantly. But things really started spiraling when talk shifted to the now infamous Maha report. If you haven't heard of it, you're not alone, mainly because nobody has, apparently, since it might as well have been written by the same AI responsible for Snapchat filters. Officially titled Make America Healthy Again, the report claimed to back Trump's trade moves with, and I quote, a groundbreaking data. The only problem, the data didn't exist. Reporters almost gleefully pointed out fake citations, missing studies, and even allegedly fabricated authors listed in the footnotes. One investigative outlet, Notice, exposed just how bad it was. Turns out a lot of the supposed experts credited in the report didn't have any idea they were involved. Naturally, the press wanted answers, and Leavitt, bless her, had none. She stammered, tried redirecting blame to the Department of Health and Human Services, and ultimately issued what has to be one of the worst excuses in political history.
I wanted to just clarify once and for all the Qatari jet, the sale, or the gift, because the Qatari government is asking the U.S. to clarify that the jet's pending transfer was initiated by the Trump administration. So is this something that the White House is going to do?
Caroline Levitt to clarify. So what's up with this Qatari jet? Is it a gift? Is it a purchase? How do you describe it?
The amount of questions we've received, and we've been incredibly clear, and I have answered this, the president has answered this, the Department of Defense has answered this. This is a government-to-government gift transfer from the Qataris.
This is just a case of minor formatting issues. Formatting, missing studies, AI manufactured sections, and actual non-existent sources were apparently just a matter of poor font choices. It would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. The reporters were relentless. They pressed her harder, zeroing in on the administration's decision to rely on what looked like a middle school science project to defend their policies. One journalist asked point blank whether the AI-generated content was approved by the White House itself. Leavitt's response? A masterpiece of non-answers. I can't speak to the methods used here, but what I can tell you is that this report is being reviewed. Translation: the report is a mess, and someone else will have to mop it up later. If the administration was hoping this excuse would buy them some time, it backfired spectacularly. And then there was that laugh again. When one reporter described the court decisions as devastating, Levitt chuckled and muttered, "Only if you believe everything you read." Yikes! If there was ever a moment that perfectly encapsulated how wildly unprepared she was, it was this one. Her laughter wasn't just dismissed, it became a symbol. For observers online, it represented the entire administration, careless, evasive, and about as serious as a reality TV audition. Critics pounced as fast as social media could refresh. One commentator described her excuses as word salad with extra dressing, while others zeroed in on the dangerous implications of shrugging off fabricated reports. The public wasn't just laughing along with her botched delivery, they were laughing at her. It felt less like a press conference and more like an unintentional satire of everything that could go wrong when you're caught without a plan. And speaking of no plan, the room's collective skepticism was almost tangible by this point. Reporters, visibly frustrated, abandoned subtlety and started punctuating their questions with skepticism so obvious it may as well have been neon lit. Questions flew about the dismantling of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, a federal agency that helps keep dangerous products off shelves. Apparently, the administration had been gradually gutting its resources, leaving consumers more or less on their own when it came to faulty toasters or exploding phone batteries. When asked why the White House prioritized slashing its budget, Levitt's answers were as empty as you'd expect. "We believe in reducing unnecessary bureaucracy," was about all she could muster, a canned line that only invited more mockery. Then, of course, someone brought up Trump's tangled web of personal business dealings. Were they influencing US policy decisions like, say, the Qatari jet? The room buzzed as this question was thrown into the mix, one journalist outright asking if the jet arrangement was a favor in return for past transactions. Leavitt visibly tightened her grip on the podium, managing only to say, "The president's businesses are not involved in this matter." The delivery sounded more like a wish than a statement of fact, with most in the room openly skeptical. But honestly, the cherry on top of this disaster Sunday was how Levitt's own phrasing made everything worse. Reporters were audibly annoyed by her repeated attempts to dodge. These phrases were recycled so many times, they practically ran out of meaning. At one point, a visibly exasperated journalist asked, "So are you ever going to explain what actually happened with the jet?" If Levitt had any plan left, it wasn't obvious. This Q&A nightmare didn't just erode the administration's credibility, it nuked it. By the end of the session, the room was no longer even pretending to take her seriously. Commentary online came in swift and brutal. One journalist quipped on Twitter, "A gift transfer? Sounds like the political equivalent of splitting the check, but forgetting your wallet." Another user joked that at this point, the White House might as well hire improv comedians to do these pressers. At least they'd be better at making stuff up on the spot, and Medses say. More than anything else that day, the Qatari jet issue showed just how disorganized and disconnected the Trump administration had become. With each half-baked answer, the perception of chaos grew. It wasn't just one mistake or one bad moment, it was the accumulation of fumbles that turned an already embarrassing press conference into a headline-grabbing disaster. The fake report, the court rulings, and now, the jet. By the end of it all, the White House's incompetence wasn't just on display, it was trending. But where does the story go from here? With so many moments of disarray piling up, up, it's hard not to ask, does anyone even know what the Trump administration is doing anymore? The press conference was more than a PR disaster. It was a spotlight on an administration fumbling its way through major crises. The laughter, the fake Maha report, and the Qatari jet confusion all painted a picture of leadership that seemed either disconnected or uninterested in addressing serious issues. It wasn't just bad optics, it was a full-blown trust meltdown. As reporters exposed fake data and avoidance tactics, the question became clear: is anyone actually steering this ship? Watching that chaos unfold, it's hard not to wonder how much damage an administration can inflict. Caroline Leavitt's performance went from bad to worse when